Hello, everyone, and welcome to a different episode of the Cover One Roundup here, live every Monday on the Cover One YouTube channel or subsequently wherever you listen to your podcasts. As I said, this is a bit of a unique episode for us, at least, because we're typically reviewing games, right? We're typically looking at what the Buffalo Bills did on Sunday, but I don't know if you heard this, Rob. The Buffalo Bills are good nowadays, so they get primetime games. In particular, tonight. Buffalo Bills play tonight in about an hour and 15 minutes. They kick off against the Tennessee Titans on Monday Night Football live from Nashville, Tennessee. That was a good bit. That's one of the better bits coming out of this Buffalo Bills Mafia Nashville takeover. So what we're going to do on this week's episode, instead of review the game, we're going to preview it. Look at the Titans offense, the Titans defense, not the Titans special teams. Sorry, I can't be asked. But we'll give you a nice little in-depth preview of the Titans, what you can expect to see tonight, how we think the Bills can win, what they need to do, what they need to attack, what they need to limit, Derrick Henry, stuff like that. And we also have a mystery guest. I know everyone tuning in just saw my tweet. They were like, whoa, who's the mystery guest? Rob, people are talking. I think it might be the biggest get in the history of Cover One.
Not just the history of Cover One. It might be in podcast history in general.
I agree. People are also saying that like, you know, Joe Rogan getting The Undertaker or Bernie Sanders.
This is up there. This is up there with that Undertaker.
Better than that. This is better than that. And when this guest comes on to preview the Titans defense in roughly a half an hour, you guys are going to go wild in the chat because this is someone, it's a familiar face, but you love them and you're going to go crazy. Again, huge acquisition for the Cover One Roundup. That will be revealed later in the show. So before we get into the preview, the Cover One Roundup and Cover One in general are brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Rob, can you tell us a little bit about Underdog?
Yeah, so Underdog Fantasy is the newest, hottest fantasy sports app. You can use it to play player props, which I'm currently doing multiple amounts of every single week and making absolutely no money, but you can by using the promo code COVER1. You can get a free $25 with a deposit of $25. So join today. You can bet over-unders on Josh Allen's passing totals, how many touchdowns Stephon Diggs is going to have, and way more different stats. So join today. Again, use the promo code COVER1.
What are your props for this week?
So I didn't win any yesterday, but tonight I have Josh Allen over 34 rushing yards. I have Derrick Henry under 100.5 rushing yards. I have Dawson Knox over 34 receiving yards, and I have Stephon Diggs over 88.5 receiving yards. So going for big money tonight.
Yeah, that's a lot of bold stuff there. I can't have Dawson Knox do well. I know people are going to come after me, but in my fantasy matchup, I am up by like 25, I think. And my opponent has Josh Allen and Dawson Knox. So I am a lock to lose.
Yeah.
But like, I just know it's going to be a slow game for Allen and Knox. Obviously, this isn't what I want to happen, but given my luck as a fantasy football player, it'll be slow and it'll look like I have a chance to win, but then they'll win on an Allen to Knox last minute touchdown. And the Bills will win, but my fantasy team will lose. So
yeah, I blacked out and started Emmanuel Sanders, Dawson Knox, Tyler Bass, and the Bills defense on my league that I'm down by only 18 points. So I'm feeling a win coming, but my opponent has Stephon Diggs. So we'll see.
Oh, so you're hoping
but
for
I'm all in on the Bills tonight.
All right, you're hoping for Emmanuel Sanders to go off. I got
you.
Again, Emmanuel Sanders down there in Nashville. I don't know if you saw that. Was that a bar last night? Sang the shout song on a stage?
Making people mad. Why aren't you in bed?
I love it,
You're
right?
34 years old. You're singing, shouting at a bar.
What are you? Yeah, why are you, 34-year-old man, not in bed at 9:30?
Right. Something's not right.
Right. They need to get stricter security down there. The Bills need to employ stricter security. But no, that was a great video in what should be a precursor to a great game. Again, Buffalo Bills versus Tennessee Titans. And before we get into the preview, this is like the third thing I've said before we get into the preview. But we're going to do the Roundup, everyone's favorite segment. It's the segment in which we run down the latest news, rumors, whatever, surrounding the Buffalo Bills in a quick fashion, in a Roundup fashion, if you will. So the only thing we have this week, I believe, are the inactives, which came out just a few moments ago. nothing all that surprising besides the inactivation. Is that a word? The being made inactive of defensive end AJ Epinesa, the preseason standout, the training camp standout, who had looked decent, had looked pretty good throughout the first 5 weeks of the season, but is made inactive tonight, which, if you ask me, which no one has, I think it's more of a numbers thing. But Rob, what do you make of AJ Epinesa being inactive tonight?
Yeah, initially you get a little surprised when you see AJ Epinesa on the inactives list, but then you look at the Titans. They're a team that doesn't exactly throw the ball a lot, and Derrick Henry is going to be their game plan. The Bills have a plethora of pass rushers behind AJ Epinesa, so it's not really like they're weakened at the defensive end spot. But Harrison Phillips is active, Justin Zimmer active, Ed Oliver active, Sarla Tule active. I think they wanted to go heavy on the defensive line. F.A. Obata is active as well, without Boogie Basham. They have that defensive end that can kick inside on third down, but still provide some talent as a run defender as well. Linebacker Andre Smith is active, as well as Tyrell Dodson. So I think the Bills and Leslie Frazier really went into this game knowing that the Titans are going to try to run the ball and run it often, and having this depth in the front seven is going to be beneficial to them. If the Titans start rolling, they can have a steady rotation of guys that can stop the run.
Right. They live and die by the run. At least they have this year, because they really haven't been able to get anything going through the air, which we'll get into momentarily. But I do think, as I said, that it's more of a numbers thing, more of an indication into the talent and the depth the Bills have on the defensive line than it is into AJ Epinesa itself. As you said, they need to stuff the middle against Derrick Henry. They need to get bodies at the middle of the field. And Harrison Phillips is a bigger body in the middle of the field than, that's not what AJ Epinesa does, but you know what I mean. And also Andre Smith made active. That's probably more of a special teams thing than it is anything else, because I think Milano is active.
Yep.
But I don't really expect him to be on a pitch count, because he was full by the end of the week. So I think he's all systems go. But just before we get into it, anything to make of Andre Smith being active besides, he's a special teamer?
No, yeah, he'll probably play special teams. Like I said, maybe if the game gets out of hand and the Bills are up a lot in the fourth quarter, they might put him in. Or, like I said, if the Titans get rolling, which no one wants to see, and they just need to have a rotation of guys at linebacker. But I wouldn't look too much into Andre Smith playing.
Co-sign that. All right, now it's what everyone tuned in for. It's the headline: Buffalo Bills versus Tennessee Titans preview. The Titans are 2-3, I believe, or 3-2. Which are they? I'm dyslexic.
What's that?
Are they 3-2 or 2-3?
3-2.
They're 3-2, the Tennessee Titans. They have a winning record. A good football team for all intents and purposes. But as I've said previously on this show, they really don't do anything that scares me besides have Derrick Henry, which is pretty frightening for any team that isn't the Tennessee Titans. Derrick Henry is an animal. But they have a few nice pieces. They have a few good players, but I'll admit they're a good team, but I'm not necessarily scared of the Tennessee Titans. Just quickly looking at statistics here, they are 10th in total offense, 26th in passing, 2nd in rushing, and then defensively, they're 23rd in total defense, 23rd against the pass, and 16th against the run. So outside of running the ball, and they have the best running back in the league probably, so you would expect them to be pretty good at that. But outside of that, they're like a middling team, like a relatively average team in terms of production elsewhere. So we're going to start with the Tennessee Titans quarterback, which is not who their offense revolves around, but hypothetically, it's who the offense revolves around. Ryan Tannehill. Interesting start of the year for Ryan Tannehill, Rob. He's been sacked 20 times in 5 games. That is the most in the NFL. To put that into perspective, he was sacked only 24 times last year. So the offensive line in Tennessee, I don't know if they're necessarily struggling to protect him, because I found an interesting stat that I need to find here. According to Pro Football Focus, Ryan Tannehill has been pressured 70 times and sacked 20, resulting in a pressures turned into sacks percentage of 28.6. By far the highest percentage in the league there. For comparison, Allen has been pressured 75 times and only sacked 5. That's a P2S percentage of 6.7. So it's not as though Tannehill is being pressured more than other quarterbacks, which, 70 times in 5 games is still a lot of pressures, but those pressures are turning into sacks at a strangely high rate. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so the Titans' offensive line is really struggling, and a lot of those numbers are in those pressure statistics given up are inflated from the New York Jets game. Surprisingly, the New York Jets were the team that really just terrorized them. But I think another issue is that you have a new receiver in Julio Jones to the team, who is one of the most dynamic players of the last decade plus, and AJ Brown, but both of them has missed time. So I don't think he's been able to get on the same page as them. And then you look at the depth behind those two receivers, and there's really none. Chester Rogers, I think, is their third highest targeted receiver. Then you have Nick Westbrook at Keene, just Marcus Johnson, just guys that you don't know. And tight end Anthony Ferkser, just random free agent Madden names or
right, yeah.
draft generated names. So I think it's a combination of both. When the pressure comes, Tannehill doesn't really have anyone to leak it out to because Derrick Henry's not really a threat in the passing game. So I just think they have a lack of depth, and this offense hasn't been able to gel for a variety of reasons. And I think that if the Titans don't get Derrick Henry going, then it puts Ryan Tannehill at a disadvantage. We saw last year he had an unreal season, and I think now he's kind of regressing back to the mean. I mean, last year he had, I think, 33 touchdowns and 6 picks, I want to say. This year he only has 6 touchdowns and 3 picks. So something really isn't clicking for Tannehill this year. And I think the offensive line has a lot to do with that.
Right. And just to go a little further into that here, according to Football Outsiders, the Titans have the 11th ranked offensive line in the league, and they're 31st against the pass as an offensive line. So that shows you or gives you a little insight into just how strong the team has been running the ball. If they can be 31st in pass protection and 11th overall, like that's how much their efficiency as a run blocking unit is propelling them up the standings. But I do agree that I think we expected to see a little bit of regression to the mean here from Ryan Tannehill after that year that he had last year. And it's not even like he's necessarily been all that bad this year. He's been without his 2 targets, his 2 top targets for some of this season. Julio Jones has missed 2 games. AJ Brown has missed a game. AJ Brown was sick today for a funny reason. I don't know if you saw that, but
no, I didn't.
AJ Brown tweeted, or he was listed as questionable with an illness, and he tweeted something something to the effect of "I'll never eat fast food again," which, but he's good to go. He appears good to go. But yes, just with Ryan Tannehill, he hasn't been bad, completing 64% of his passes for 1,200 yards, 6 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Has also fumbled the ball 3 times, lost 3 fumbles. It's just an issue of, can he stay on his feet? Like, can the protection hold up for him? If he has a pocket, if he is able to actually not get sacked, not get pressured, he hasn't been bad. But again, 20 sacks through 5 games. That is an ungodly amount of sacks.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's a combination of losing some talented players. I mean, he lost Corey Davis, Adam Humphries, Jonnu Smith, and replaced it with Julio Jones, and that's it. And I think that once he gets time with this offense, I think they'll be able to do a little bit more. But I still think this is a team that is super top heavy, and the offensive line, like you said, those statistics between rushing and passing efficiency are just ridiculous. So they really need to be a more balanced offense, and I think that they want to try to get more balanced. But right now, it's all Derrick Henry, and because Tannehill's just not pulling it.
So obviously, given these stats, given these advanced statistics into Ryan Tannehill, it just not even how often he's been pressured, but how often he's been sacked. We wrote this down in the preview. It looks pretty clear that one of the keys to victory for the Bills is going to be pressuring Ryan Tannehill. Would you agree there?
Yeah, definitely. According to Pro Football Focus, without pressure, Tannehill's completing 71.2% of his passes, averaging 8.3 yards per attempt, with half of his touchdowns and 2 interceptions. But with pressure, his completion percentage drops all the way to 43.8%. He's averaging just 4.4 yards per attempt. So I think that pressure is going to be important, and we know that the Bills can get pressure. But even though they haven't been getting the sack numbers in the last couple of weeks, they have been getting pressure. We saw him hit Patrick Mahomes last week. The Bills still have the 8th highest sack percentage in the league, although I think those are still kind of skewed from that Dolphins game. But those 14 sacks are the 5th most in the league. So I think pressuring Tannehill has to be a key for the Bills defense tonight. But that's only going to be made possible if they can force them into those second and third and long situations by stopping Derrick Henry.
What are you anticipating the game plan to be? Obviously, I think we're both expecting Derrick Henry to be the focus for the Bills in terms of the player who they have to stop. But are you expecting a blitz heavy game plan here?
I don't know, just because they're going to need to play in a base defense. I think they're going to try to do some different things with Taron Johnson and keep him close to the line of scrimmage, or maybe bring another linebacker in often. I'm really interested to see what they decide to do, because against a team like them, Derrick Henry's run the ball 142 times already this season, which I think Alvin Kamara is second with 94. So he has 50 more carries, and it's not like these are through 16 games. This is through 5 weeks, and he has 50 more carries than the next highest running back. So that what their game plan going into the game is going to be. Everyone knows it. Leslie Frazier knows it. You know it. I know it. They're going to feed Derrick Henry as much as they can. So I think the Bills are going to need to stuff him at the line of scrimmage and get as many bodies on him as possible. And that's easier said than done, as we all know. But I think their focus has to be stopping Henry on those early downs and forcing him into third and long situations where they can't start sending the extra rushers.
We'll get into Derrick Henry here in a second, but just now that I'm thinking about it, Epinesa being inactive and that active spot going to a linebacker instead, because at least last week, and I think for most of the year, they've gone 9 active defensive linemen, 5 active linebackers. Today, they're going 6 active linebackers, 8 active defensive linemen. With how they rotate the defensive line, with how much of a talking point that's been this year, you'd expect when you're playing a player like Derrick Henry, you'd expect to want to have more defensive linemen, because Henry's a guy who kind of heats up as the game goes along. As he wears down the defense, he just gets stronger, and that kind of, is how his stat lines kind of get going, kind of get inflated as the game goes on, because the defense is just getting so worn out and he just runs over guys. So I'm not saying like, hey, having one less defensive lineman, they're still going to do rotation and they're still going to rotate guys, and that should hypothetically help with none of them getting too particularly tired, and then, it kind of being a wash in terms of Derrick Henry tiring the guys out. But it is interesting that this is the game that they decide to take a defensive lineman off the field in favor of an extra linebacker. So I think we should focus more on Derrick Henry here. As we said, we've kind of been beating around the bush here. He is still an animal. 640 yards through 5 games. That is first in the NFL, quite obviously. Averaging 128 rushing yards per game. Again, that is first in the NFL. Leading NFL in rushing touchdowns with 7. I think at least so far, he has been the best running back in the NFL. Without question. Christian McCaffrey's been hurt, so who else is really in the debate besides Zach Moss? No, Derrick Henry has quite obviously he's on pace for another historic season, probably. Like, at this rate, he's going to surpass 2,000 yards again, probably quite easily. I don't know if this holds up, but at this pace, this is incredible. But it's going to be interesting because the Bills' rushing defense has been stellar throughout the first 5 weeks of the season, only allowing an average rushing yards per game of 78.4. They've only allowed a lead back to get over 30 yards twice. Their most, of course, being Najee Harris in week 1, 45 yards. Not a great lead back performance by any means. And then they only allowed, I think, who else? Someone else had 30 yards. Everyone else has had fewer than 30 yards. And they haven't allowed a rushing touchdown to a running back all season. The only rushing touchdown they've allowed all season, if my research is correct, is to Taylor Heineke. Mm-hmm. So they are just shutting down opposing running backs. So this is the matchup. This is probably the key to victory, it's the key to victory for every team when they play Tennessee, right? Is shut down their best player, shut down the best running back in the NFL, the lifeblood of their offense. But lifeblood, that's not a term. It is now, though. But like it's going to come down to whether or not they can shut down Derrick Henry. And it's fun. It's interesting because the Bills defense has been so stout, has been so stellar against the run. And now they're going up against the most powerful running back in the league, or at least the most dominant at this point.
Yeah, Derrick Henry is just an animal. Like, we all know this, but the Bills' run defense, this was an area that this team was not good a year ago at defending the run, and they still limited Henry in that game. I think he had 57 yards when they played last year. but this is a totally new defense. Star Latulila's back. All the players, I don't think any player is really having a down year as far as the starters go. And this is an opportunity for them to show on a national stage again that this defense is legit. We saw last week they had that signature win against Kansas City where Josh Allen kind of took the crown from Patrick Mahomes for the time being, and now their defense has a time to shine because all eyes are on Derrick Henry this season. Like you said, having another historic season at just a ridiculous pace from both volume and production. So yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry is the player that you need to stop if you're playing the Tennessee Titans. But I think that it could turn into a situation. We'll talk about the defense in a little, where if the Bills just start blowing them out, Henry won't even be a factor. So I think the Titans are going to lean on Henry earlier to kind of chew up the clock and keep Josh Allen on the sidelines. But it's up to the defense to get off the field and force Ryan Tannehill into those long situations. So Derrick Henry is a player that I'm excited to watch. I love watching these superstar players, but I'm hoping the Bills are able to have an answer for him.
This is probably, obviously, it's the Bills' toughest matchup in terms of a running back this year. Like Lone Wolf writes, what running backs have we played, though? Najee Harris, Antonio Gibson, whose best play was on a reception. But the Bills have played a couple good running backs, but they haven't played Derrick Henry. Granted, there's only one Derrick Henry, very few running backs of Derrick Henry's caliber. But this will obviously be their toughest matchup so far. And it's probably Derrick Henry's toughest matchup so far in terms of a front seven, in terms of a defense that is playing as well as it is. Again, you're going to see some rotation. I'm interested to see how Tremaine Edmonds plays against the run. He's flashed against the run. Milano has as well. But Tremaine Edmonds, it's going to be like a looking in the mirror thing. He's going to go up against the other 6'5", 240-pound guy, try to stop him in the backfield, though I don't think Derrick Henry is 23 in his fourth season. So Tremaine Edmonds has that over Derrick Henry. But yeah, it's going to be, as you said, I'm also excited to watch Derrick Henry, love to watch Derrick Henry play. I just hope today it's the Bills stopping him. Like, I hope this isn't one of those. I hope we don't get a stiff arming Josh Norman highlight tonight.
Yeah, definitely. And we heard the Bills secondary talking about the challenge that it is to play Derrick Henry. And Taron Johnson might have had a quote to be some bulletin board. I think he said something to the effect of it's either him or me, and it ain't going to be me in terms of getting got on TV. So we'll see how Taron Johnson fares against Derrick Henry if he finds him one-on-one in space. But they were all talking about just needing to gang tackle and staying true to themselves and doing what they do and not worrying about the Josh Norman highlights, because Henry's an animal and it's funny to watch and you're going to get put on a meme. But then again, it still happened from Derrick Henry. So it's not like some scrub player is making you look silly. But I think the Bills are playing fast, physical. Tremaine Edmonds is much better against the run this year than he's been in his entire 4-year career at just 23 years old. So I'm just looking forward to seeing this defense play, because I mean, you know me, I'm able to be pessimistic and find a way to find different matchups that across the board that the Bills will lose. And I think that after watching this team for 5 games, I think they could limit what Derrick Henry is able to do if they can just fly to the ball and tackle.
Right. Yeah. In terms of being pessimistic, you especially, but me to a lesser extent, we come from writing, or we wrote in an era where the Bills found ways to lose games and things that could go wrong did go wrong most of the time. Whereas now it's the opposite. So like now, like in the past, you'd be like, oh, Derrick Henry's just going to run over him. It's going to be Le'Veon Bell, 300 yards in the snow or whatever. But like, I mean, this rush defense has been stellar. So like, if you gun to my head, are the Bills going to stop Derrick Henry? I'd probably say yeah, because they've done relatively well against Derrick Henry in the past. Or as everyone is saying in the chat, they've done relatively well against Derrick Henry in the past. In 2019, I think they limited Derrick Henry pretty well. I don't even remember if he played that game, but he certainly wasn't the Derrick Henry that is now Derrick Henry.
Jerry Sullivan tweeted out today, everyone's favorite Buffalo sports writer, said in 2019 and 20, Derrick Henry combined to rush for 135 yards in those 2 games against the Bills, averaging 3.5 yards a carry. And every other game outside of those in those 2 years, he's averaged 120 at 5.2 yards a carry, which is just crazy. So the Bills definitely have been able to limit what he's been able to do in the past. And now with an even improved run defense, I think that they're going to have some good big numbers to show for it.
Our mystery guest will be here momentarily, so we will quickly preview the Titans wide receivers before we are joined by, again, the biggest acquisition in podcast history to preview the Tennessee Titans defense. The production from the wide receivers this year for Tennessee has been a bit lackluster, has been a bit underwhelming. Why is that? It's because they've been hurt for the most part. A.J. Brown, like I said, missed week 4. Julio Jones missed weeks 4 and 5. They're a team that lives and dies, or at least has in the past, lives and dies by play action, right? That's kind of how their offense runs. And it's been an incredibly efficient unit the past couple of years off play action. The idea, of course, being get Derrick Henry going, get the best running back in the league going, and that'll open up passing lanes. It doesn't really take a genius to figure that one out. But it hasn't really kicked off like that this year, or it hasn't really worked out. And that might be because they really haven't tried to do play action. I read a stat that said in week 1, they only used play action 5 times out of 64 plays. And that's really not the only week that all 3 or all 4 of them have been on the field. Tannehill, Henry, A.J. Brown, and Julio Jones. But it's one of 3 times they've all been on the field together, and they only used play action 5 times. So the acquisition of Julio Jones was hypothetically a super fun one, not necessarily a put them over the top move, given, as you alluded to earlier, Rob, everything they lost in the offseason. So it wasn't necessarily like a Super Bowl move from Tennessee, but I mean, getting one of the better receivers in the league is never a bad idea. And he seemed ideally like he'd fit in the offense, but through 4 or whatever games, however many they played together, that just hasn't really been the case. Julio Jones did have 128 yards in week 2, but A.J. Brown didn't show up in that game. I think he had 3 drops in week 2, or he had 3 drops in week 3. Sorry. But just between Tannehill getting sacked, Brown's struggles, and just injuries, that this offense, at least the passing attack, really hasn't gotten going.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm looking right now, Tannehill's been used play action on 26.2% of his dropbacks. He's completed 65.9% of those passes, averaging 10 yards an attempt. So in the limited time that they've used play action, it's worked. And like you said, I think they just need time to gel, because these are 3 of the most explosive players in the league. Looking at Derrick Henry, Julio Jones, and A.J. Brown, we saw the kind of year A.J. Brown had last season. But there's a lot of factors that go into it: a different offense, different weapons. Now injuries are factoring into it. So these are 2 receivers that still scare me a lot, because it's Julio Jones. I mean, he's a future Hall of Famer. A.J. Brown looked like an all-pro last year. So these are guys where I feel like it's just a matter of weeks before they just go off. And like you said, Julio Jones with the 128 yards a couple weeks ago. But these are players that, if they get clicking, it's a big if to say, but they could be a problem. I just don't think that the depth is there. And that shows once one of them are banged up. Chester Rogers is not going to carry an offense. And you quickly go from a Pro Bowl skill position group to the Detroit Lions real quick, basically. So, I mean, these are players that can take the top off of defense, but they can work underneath as well. Like A.J. Brown's run after the catch ability is pretty much second to none, especially for his size. And then Julio Jones' big play ability is still crazy when he's healthy. So I think that this is a team that's capable of making big plays in the passing game, but it's just a matter of time of when we see this.
It's hopefully not this week. Going off that, you wrote down a key matchup to watch here. You have Tre'Davious White versus Julio. Do you think Tre'Davious White? I don't know. He's been kind of following receivers in recent weeks, which really isn't something he's done throughout his career. Really, it hasn't been something he's predominantly done. But the last couple of weeks, he's matched up against Terry McLaurin, Brandon Cooks. Was he on Tyreek all week last week?
For the most part.
That was a rap bar. Tyreek all week last week. Damn. But so yeah, how do you think Tre'Davious White's going to be matched up on either Julio Jones or A.J. Brown all game, or what are you anticipating here?
So I did write those notes before I knew the situation with A.J. Brown being active. I didn't know that it was just a little case of the bubble guts from fast food. So now with A.J. Brown, that note might change, but I still am. That is a matchup that I'm looking forward to see, is Trey White versus Julio Jones. Guys that Trey White's age look up to players like Julio Jones. A.J. Brown was one that really lobbied for Julio to join the Titans. But Tre'Davious White, it's crazy. He's the most targeted corner on the Bills roster this season, which is crazy. 33 targets, but he's only allowed 20 catches for 200 yards, still hasn't given up a touchdown. In his last 3 games, he's been targeted 20 times. We saw 8 versus Tyreek last week. He's been trailing the best receiver, like you said, McLaurin, Brandon Cooks, and most recently Tyreek Hill. So whoever he gets lined up with, whether it's A.J. Brown or Julio Jones, it's going to be something to watch because it's going to be a fun battle.
Question here from Don. Will the Bills cover? What is the spread?
Do we know? I want to say 6.5.
I think on Tally site, I picked the Bills to cover. So, Don, I would say you don't do that. Having a bad week on Tally site. Do not.
And speaking of Tally site, we've got someone,
our
special guest, the legend.
You should probably be the host. All right. Joining us to preview the Tennessee Titans defense. Again, biggest get in podcast history. It's Gregory Thompson.
What's going on, guys? I accidentally stumbled onto the wrong show, I think. I'm not sure.
Uh-oh. Well, it works for us, right?
For Don's question, a lot of books have it opened at 5, 4.5, worked its way up to 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5. There's some places where it's 7 points tonight. So there's an obscene amount of money coming in on Buffalo, and it just keeps going that way. Normally, that's not a good thing, but it was the same thing with Kansas City last week. A lot of money was coming in on the Bills, and that number kept moving, and it wasn't even close. An analytic I saw earlier, the Bills are exceeding their against the spread point differential more than any team in the NFL. So not only are they beating the spread, even some of them when you're you're favored by 17 against Houston, some of these huge ones, they're exceeding their against the spread differential more than any team in the NFL. So, I had a couple friends earlier ask like, hey, should I bet on them? I said, they're not going to go undefeated. The Bills are probably going to lose at some point again this season. I would not bet against them until they give you a reason not to at this point.
All right, we got to kick you off the show. The Bills are leaving. The Bills are going to lose the game. Our guests in the comment section do not appreciate losses. So
yeah, no. If you say you cannot say the Bills will lose a game. They've already lost one. 1-11 loss.
See, I said they wouldn't go undefeated, and they've already got their one loss out of the way. It's fine. It's totally fine.
Genius. That's why you're the professional when you're on this show. But Greg, we're going to get into the Titans defense here. When I was taking notes, I have a whole page of notes in front of me. The word that I kicked it off with is middling. So do you have what are your overarching thoughts here of the Titans defense?
So it's middling might be polite. It's not terribly different than when you talk about Kansas City in that there are some impressive names at the top. There are some guys, Jeffrey Simmons is a game wrecker. Like, he's a really good player. Kevin Byard is a legit Pro Bowl, all-pro level safety. There's got, Janoris Jenkins is a name people recognize. Christian Fulton.
Sorry to cut you off. No, Janoris Jenkins is not a name that we recognize because he's Jackrabbit Jenkins now.
Did he legally change his name to Jackrabbit?
I don't know if legally, but everywhere he's Jackrabbit now.
No, I believe he legally changed his name to Jackrabbit Jenkins, which God bless him. Harold Landry. So there are a handful of names that you recognize that are guys that, hey, that's a play. They must be pretty good because I recognize a handful of names. The challenge is there's been a significant drop off. The depth is tough. And then you add into that where, hey, they're not playing at an exceptional level. Now, Christian Fulton was probably playing the best out of any of their cornerbacks. Mm-hmm. He just got put on IR. So now you're taking a pass defense that was already pretty poor, and now you're taking their best corner and putting them on injured reserve. We had a guest on Wednesday night on the Cover One preview show, and I had said that the hardest part for me is, how can you have a defensive line that has Jeffrey Simmons, Bud Dupree, Harold Landry, and then tell me that they're last in the NFL in sacks and in pressure? Like, those are just, I would assume that you'd have to be pretty solid at getting to the quarterback. Like, those are guys that's what they do. So it's really hard. I like to think they're going to bounce back to some level. Like, I don't think they're going to be the worst defense in the NFL as the season goes along, but they've been in a hard way. Their injury luck hasn't slowed down to this point. They're getting some names back on offense. Obviously, A.J. Brown and Julio Jones coming back is a good thing. But on defense, it's still looking rough.
Yeah, Bud Dupree's only played in 2 games. I think he had a knee injury. It looks like he'll be back tonight. But as you said, they have guys defensively that are good. Like Harold Landry, according to PFF, has 30 pressures this year. That's sixth in the NFL. Jeffrey Simmons has 17 pressures, 1.5 sacks. They have good players. It just Denicio Autry, is that a name that I wrote down? It is 18 pressures. Just they have players, but it's just not really. Someone's yelling outside my room. Sorry, it's not translating into production.
Meatloaf.
Right? That's what's going on right now. So, Rob, just what are your thoughts on the Titans' pass rush?
Yeah, obviously it starts with Harold Landry, as we've seen, and his pressure numbers aren't just inflated by one big game. I think he's the only player in the league who has at least 5 pressures in every single game this season, which is an impressive feat. Because we've talked a lot about Greg Rousseau's pressures and AJ Epinez's pressures and the total that they have, but those all came in that week 2 Dolphins game. Other than Greg Rousseau, obviously he's had a huge game a week ago, but these stats can get skewed early in the season. But Landry's put up numbers. But outside of him, I think Bud Dupree missing time is affected that. They paid him a lot of money to come in and contribute on defense. And Jeffrey Simmons is a game record, like you said, Greg, and he's a player, but he can't do it all. I think the issues in the secondary, the linebacker problems that they have can all kind of trickle down to the defensive line. If teams are able to get the ball out in the passing game on them, which they've been able to do, the pressures aren't going to do it all. So if they don't have coverage on the back end, the pressure doesn't matter.
The complementary style that they could set up has some potential, and they have a weird knack for picking a lot of my draft crushes, like Christian Fulton and Elijah Molden and Caleb Farley and just a lot of guys that I really liked in the draft process, but obviously just haven't translated at this point. And a huge chunk of their challenge is actually the middle of the defense, and that their linebacking crew. Man, and even Cruikshank and how they've gone opposite Bayard from a safety standpoint, the middle of the field has just been a disaster for them. So we'll see if that bounces back. Obviously, the Bills have done pretty well picking apart teams to this point, but this is a defense that is not excited to see an offense clicking on all cylinders coming tonight.
Yeah,
so
this is a defense. I think they gave up 6 40-plus yard pass plays, which is the most in the league. I think they gave up the second most 20-plus yard pass plays. So Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs have to be licking their lips at this matchup. I think against the slot, even Cole Beasley, a lot of people are predicting a big game out of him. Pro Football Focus said they gave up the 5th most yards to slot receivers. So opportunities are there for the Bills offense to make an impression. But what I want to see is how Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown fare against Harold Landry and Bud Dupree, because they flip those guys around. They're going to move them around, and they're players that you really need to account for. So how do you think that the Bills are going to look to negate their pass rush?
So obviously they've had assignments like this before, where when you go into a team like Washington, where, hey, the back 7, the coverage isn't that good, but we got to be serious about this defensive line. What are we going to do? And they obviously, a lot of Dawson Knox, everybody sees him move around. He's not always hand in the dirt tight end guy. He's rarely hand in the dirt tight end guy. They move him around. He does that little formation where he sits almost like a pistol, where he's right behind the guard and the tackle, just kind of hanging out, and they use him to pick up the blitz a lot, or to figure out where they need to adjust coverages to. And one of the sneakiest ones areas that Josh Allen maybe doesn't get as much credit for is his understanding of pressure packages and identifying them mid setup, and as the play clock's coming down, and then adjusting formations and getting the coverage shifted to where it needs to go. Last week there was the play where he's literally jumped right up there, hey, everybody right, shifting them. That was the huge play to Dawson Knox, and that everybody pays attention to that. Well, he adjusted to that he's like, no, they're gonna blitz on this play. I know the blitz is coming. You guys adjust over here, everybody shift over there. I'll be able to roll this way. And I think the stat that comes into play will be in effect tonight. Josh Allen is number 1 in the NFL by a lot in his percent of pressures that result in a sack. He's the only quarterback in the NFL below 10%, and he's at 6%. The second lowest in the NFL is 12%, which means the offensive line is doing a decent job, probably not quite as good as what we think it is, because he's getting away from pressures more than any other quarterback in the NFL. And if he knows where the coverage and the protection scheme is going, and he's able to then adjust there, and then his size and athleticism allow him to get out of more of them than other quarterbacks might, that combination's working right now. I would expect the same tonight. I don't expect Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown to pitch a shutout. I don't expect them to not give up any pressures. They've obviously we've had that as the season has gone. I'll say they usually struggle a little bit more. Deion usually does with the true speed rushers around the side. When guys use the combination of power, he's usually in better shape to handle that. So it'll be interesting, because Landry and Dupree probably lean a little bit more on the speed side of it. So he's going to need to be, conscious of that, to not let that get around the outside shoulder. Brown obviously is kind of the opposite. He's got the athleticism and the quick feet, but he falls a little bit prey to the counter moves, the counter power, being able to come back, and if he's not ready, the straight bull rush can get him. So those are some areas I'm going to be interested to see. So far, between Dable and Allen, they've done a pretty good job scheming up the ability to hold them at bay and to give extra chips, extra attention where they need to, when your offense isn't as reliant on the running back out of the backfield. Keeping someone into block is okay. There's a lot of 6-man protections out there with the Bills, and they're pretty smart. You saw that I've never seen it before, where Josh Allen threw like the Ephus pitch, like where it was like that crazy lofted swing pass up over the defensive end. He threw that twice last week. So obviously they're finding different ways to work around pressure when we're obviously not going to go without any for an entire game.
Moving to the Titans secondary here, Rob and I were discussing off stream before we started here that the only reasonable explanation is that Jackrabbit Jenkins hired a brand manager because that was a tattered brand, because like he was just Janoris Jenkins. He was just old cornerback who's been in the league since 2012 and was not great. And I told Rob that I was watching old Titans games on a Game Pass this morning, and I heard like, oh, DeAndre Hopkins comes down with it over Jackrabbit Jenkins. And I'm like, wait, they have a dude named Jackrabbit? Like, there's no shot the Bills are beating a guy named Jackrabbit. And then it's like, oh, it's just Janoris. Like, whatever. But he might be Jackrabbit, but he's still Janoris Jenkins. He's on 22 receptions, 32 targets for an average of 12.1 yards, only 1 touchdown allowed. I do believe that was to DeAndre Hopkins, but like he's fine. He's Janoris Jenkins, or Jackrabbit Jenkins. Christian Fulton was the standout cornerback, as you said, Greg. He made a few good plays this year, just been a good cornerback. But as you said, he's on IR. Do we know who is starting in his place? I heard rumblings that it was going to be Caleb Farley, but I don't know if that's been confirmed.
I have not heard it confirmed. I'm going to assume it's going to be some combination of Farley and Elijah Molden. They've worked them in. I'm not sure who they're going to try to put into the slot to be able to move back out. We've also seen a lot of reps. Obviously, Chris Jackson has been out there. So, I'm not sure where else they're going to pull from. They have some guys from a depth standpoint. Breon Borders has gotten reps with them, but
former Bill.
It's not in great shape. It's not a fantastic option. But Caleb Farley is an elite talent at cornerback. Like, he is an elite high-end prospect. The only reason he fell was the health concerns and his ability to stay healthy long-term. I don't think those were an immediate thing, that he can't stay healthy for a whole game. Like, I think he can come in and play well. The challenge is asking him to come in and play well against Stephon Diggs and Emmanuel Sanders in your first game with major reps as a professional. I mean, that's asking a lot. The kid's played 32 snaps the entire season in 2 different games, and it's just easing his way in. That's a big ask. So he's an elite athlete. He's an elite talent. I'm sure he's confident for a reason. The issue is there, who do you protect? Because Kevin Byard can be a safety blanket. He's the kind of guy that you can bracket, and he's a Micah Hyde caliber safety. Like, he's that kind of deep threat takeaway guy. The challenge is you can only help one corner, and when you have 33-year-old Janoris Jenkins on one side and kind of wet behind the ears Caleb Farley on the other, somebody's not going to get protected, and that's going to be a problem.
It bodes well. this situation.
So
Bodes
somebody earlier asked, would I pick the over? I do like the over tonight at 53.5. I think there's going to be a lot of points and an exciting evening of touchdowns back and forth.
This is what I do with the Titans every year, though, because they've played the Titans. I feel like the last 4 or 5 years in a row, they play the Titans a lot. But every year, I'm just like, oh, it's Tennessee. It's whatever. I don't really anticipate a close game whatsoever. And then last year, it was the opposite. So not fun. But
yeah.
I think that's actually a pretty good defensive preview. I'll go to Rob and then Greg. If there's one defensive player on Tennessee, obviously it's going to take a team effort, but if there's one defensive player that you're looking at that you're like, okay, this kind of poses a problem, not that the Bills can't overcome it, but this could be a problem, who is that player, Rob?
I think I was going to say Harold Landry, but I think it's going to be Jeffrey Simmons, just because of the caliber of player that he is and where the Bills offense is weakest at its interior. I think that he can potentially be a player that makes things really difficult for Josh Allen and Jack Moss and Devin Singletary as well, if he's on his A game.
It's a great choice. That would have been my choice as well. I do think Harold Landry deserves to be mentioned. You talk about a guy who has the ability to beat guys around the corner. That's a little bit of what we've seen so far. And we know that the one negative play Josh had against Kansas City where he did his pivot away but couldn't get away fast enough from the pressure and took that ugly intentional grounding. Those are the areas where you can get a significant negative play or a strip sack or something like that. It's going to take something like that. But obviously we saw last year, you open up the game, whatever the third play of the game was a pick six, and then things started to snowball and you get all the things that are there. That's what Tennessee's going to need tonight. This isn't a team that Buffalo would beat 100 times out of 100. They wouldn't. Tennessee still has talent. Tennessee has, good players on their team, but they're going to need some things to go their way. It would take something like that with a big game from probably Harold Landry and Jeffrey Simmons, both getting consistent pressure, creating a turnover themselves. That's the kind of game I think it would take.
My player, of course, is Jackrabbit Jenkins. So,
obviously,
Greg, thank you so much for joining us for this Titans D preview.
If it's okay, I saw one question Paul asked in the chat. Is it all right if I jump in and answer it? It's a good one.
I suppose.
Saying about I've gone back and forth with a bunch of people on Twitter about, hey, why are we seeing these shifts in the actives for the game today? There's a couple things. One, I'm surprised too. I'm surprised that AJ Epinesa was scratched, but there's a combination of three different things going on here that I think make it understandable. In that, one, Matt Milano is back, but it wouldn't be crazy that they're going to try to manage his reps. Well, they kept 6 linebackers active. They normally keep 5. They kept an extra linebacker active tonight, which it makes sense from a depth standpoint. You also had both Tywan Jones and Saran Neal limited and missing practices and potentially to be questionable coming into the game. Well, they're keeping both Gabe Davis and Jake Kumaro active because they're the backups at gunner and the ability to step in there. Then you add in, it's King Henry and the Titans. You're going to want a defensive tackle. So they brought back in Harrison Phillips and they kept F.A. Obata, who is more flexible at defensive tackle than either Boogie Basham or AJ Epinesa. So in a normal week, I don't think we're going to see this often, but I can at least tell myself where it is. I think later in the year, we might see this kind of surprise with Mario Addison instead of AJ Epinesa. But it's crazy that the Bills just have the kind of depth where you can just give guys an off week and take a breather for a week. It's a great problem to have, but I think in the circumstances of this particular game, where they could use the extra depth, where they want depth on the defensive line, I think it kind of makes sense that AJ was the guy, but I was surprised too.
Yeah, as I said earlier, it's more of an indication, or I don't know if the indication is the right word, but more of a testament to their depth at defensive line than it is to AJ Epinesa's performance.
Some first world problems Bills fans are not used
to. Truly, right? But Greg, before we get you out of here, everyone ends their show, everyone ends this show with a hot take. So before you leave, what is your hot take for this week?
Ooh, something spicy and fun. That
Put him on the
Andre
spot.
Roberts will be a Buffalo Bill by Wednesday.
Whoa.
While you guys were on the air, the Houston Texans cut Andre Roberts.
Oh, he's coming home.
So obviously I have no inside information. But I don't think Isaiah McKenzie's been revelation at returner at this point. And my call is that they're going to cut Matt Breida and sign
Not shocking.
Andre Roberts, because I think you could get Breida back on the practice squad and do a game day elevation when you need him. But if RB3 is just going to be a game day inactive every week, can't RB3 just be in the practice squad?
I'm sure Andre Roberts, you could get him on the practice squad as well.
Yeah, and I think there's some stuff going on with his knee, so maybe it takes a minute. But yeah, I will not be shocked if Andre Roberts is wearing a Buffalo Bills uniform this season.
I like it.
Yeah.
Football's coming home.
There's my hot take.
All right. So, Greg, thank you so much
Thanks,
for
guys.
joining us.
Thanks,
Enjoy
Greg.
the game.
Go Bills.
Go Bills. So, I didn't know that. That would have been my hot take had I known that Andre Roberts was available.
Huge.
That
would be a move for the Bills. I mean, McKenzie really hasn't done much. It makes sense.
I'd say it's a borderline block at this point. I'm sure as soon as I'm sure Andre Roberts' agent got the phone call that he was getting cut. Next phone call was to Brandon Beane saying, "Hey, he's going to be available. You can bring him in." I would say that's probably absolutely. I would be more surprised if it didn't than if it did. So wrapping up here relatively soon. Because the game starts relatively soon. Is there anything else that we want to talk about here, matchup wise? Anything that we haven't touched on?
I think we touched on it all.
All right, so it's time for everyone's second favorite segment behind the Roundup. It's the hot take segment. The segment where we give hot takes. Greg just kicked us off with a doozy, so I'll go to you, Rob. What is your hot take for this Bills versus Titans matchup?
So another shout out to Underdog Fantasy. I'm playing a prop on there with Derrick Henry under 100.5 yards. I'm going to make it even hotter, and I'm going to say the Bills hold Derrick Henry to under 75 yards. Guaranteed.
That's real hot. That's a hot. Oh, guaranteed.
Guarantee it.
Well, given everything, right? Like, given how they performed against him in the past, given how strong this run defense has been this year, it's not an egregious take, right? It's just I can look at it and be like, Derrick Henry under 75 yards, you're crazy. But, given what we talked about on this podcast, it's not that crazy. It's a realistic, reasonable estimation or prediction. My prediction, as people may have come to expect at this point, not that hot. My prediction is that Reggie Gilliam, he was active, correct? He was, I do believe. Yep. Reggie Gilliam will score a receiving touchdown. It's a niche pick. It's a weird pick, but you can book it. I don't do the sports betting. Do a prop bet right now. Put like $1,000 on it. Actually, don't. But if I was on Underdog, use promo code Cover1. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll sign up for Underdog right now. Use promo code Cover1, and then I will place $500 on Reggie Gilliam scoring a receiving touchdown. Thank you, Roman. Roman just did it. Done. That's what I like to see, Roman. Roman's come around on my hot takes. A couple weeks ago, he was like, "These are awful takes, Kyle. You don't know what you're doing." Now he's like, I respect the hot takes so much.
I'm looking right now. They don't have a Reggie Gilliam prop on there.
All right, Underdog. Well, we had
to got to have a word with our sponsors. So.
Promo code Cover1. Use promo code Cover1 at Underdog Fantasy. So, Reggie Gilliam, again, last week he did, I'm saying this because I saw like one fun thing that he did last week where he kind of did like a figure 8 in the backfield before the ball was snapped. He's going to do that again this week, but he's going to get thrown the ball, touchdown, Reggie Gilliam receiving touchdown. It's going to be maybe the best moment of the season. I know there's been a few good moments so far, but when we look back on this year and we think about the Bills raising the Lombardi Trophy and we think about Josh Allen hurdling a Kansas City Chiefs defender, we're going to look back to this Reggie Gilliam receiving touchdown versus the Tennessee Titans as maybe the most important moment. Thank you guys.
Final score prediction.
I think last week I said like 50-14. So I'll stick by it.
50-14.
I don't know how they're getting there, but they're getting there.
Okay. I'll say 45-18.
You know, that's I think you're giving their offense a bit too much credit, if you ask me. But no, again, and I feel like we've been not dismissive of the Titans. Like they have names, they have hypothetically a strong team, but there are very few teams this year in particular that are better than the Bills. Like you could argue that there are no teams that are better than the Bills this year. Like there are realistically only one or two, maybe three teams that give me pause that like I'm genuinely scared of if they were to match up with the Bills. Not even genuinely scared, just like concerned. The Titans aren't really one of them. So again, not a cakewalk, but it should be a fun game tonight for Bills fans. So want to thank you guys for listening or for watching this week's show. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube, Cover One. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes. Leave a review if you'd like to. That'd be much appreciated. If you're interested, if you enjoyed interacting and talking to us throughout this show, consider subscribing to Cover One Premium. There you will have access to the Cover One Premium Slack where you can interact with us and hundreds of other Bills fans all the time. Great conversations always going on in the Slack channel. Also have some great premium content there from Eric, always whipping up good stuff. And we're always working on stuff on the site, premium content. So yes, if you're interested, please subscribe to Cover One Premium. Make sure to follow all the Cover One writers on social media, Twitter, Instagram, wherever you can find them, follow them. Rob, where can the people find you on Twitter?
Give me a follow at Rob Quinn 619.
You can follow me on Twitter at Kyle Silagyi. Again, check out Underdog Fantasy, promo code Cover1. Do all the good stuff that I just talked about. So we will talk to you next week with a Titans preview. It's going to be a couple weeks or a week old at that point, but we'll talk about that bye-week standouts from the first half of the season, whatever. Well, you'll find out next week. All right. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.